Thank you for that introduction. I'm so honored to be here. I have had the privilege of kind of listening around for the last couple of days at some of the sessions. And as a person who is incredibly interested in and a student of culture, I have to say that the culture here is beautiful. It just feels good. It feels like you have put a lot of energy and effort into it, like a lot of really wonderful, values-aligned people have come together to create what is the CMAA experience. That's happening now, but it sounds like it's been happening for a long time, and it also sounds like it's growing a lot, which is really something to be proud of. I have to say, I love standing on stage, but after the students, tough spot. They were amazing. So for those of you who didn't actually see the students' presentation, I hope you get an opportunity to. Your future is in very, very good hands. I started drinking coffee when I was 5. I don't know if that sounds early or late, depends on like where you come from. I think in Costa Rica it might be late. But I come from a serious coffee drinking family, serious. My parents, both my mother and my father, drank coffee from early morning till late at night. There was never any of those, oh no, you can't drink coffee after a certain hour kind of things. We didn't have decaf, right? We had just old school like coffee pot. We poured water out of the faucet. Does anybody remember that back in the day? It was just like, that was our family life all the time. And as I was very young, kind of watching them, drinking coffee all the time, every once in a while I'd take a little sip. And then at 5 years old, my father finally did it. He said, "Do you want a cup of coffee?" Yes, I do. So my father poured me a cup of coffee. It was pretty small. I'm sure it was like in a sippy cup. I was 5 years old. And he said, "Okay, now what?" And I realized I didn't know what to do next. I didn't actually know how to prepare my coffee, right? Having a cup of coffee is a big step. That's a lot of autonomy. But how does one prepare coffee? And so my father, because he was very into like education, would say, "This is how you prepare coffee. You make it like yourself. Go look at your mother's coffee." And so I went and looked at my mother's coffee, because of course she had a fresh cup. And it was heavy with milk. It was very, very light, a lot of milk. I tasted it, kind of bitter. And he said, "Your mother is white." My mom is white, blonde hair, blue eyes, United States. "Your mother is white, not very sweet, a little bitter. That's her coffee." Now, check out my coffee. My father's black, United States, African American. Check out my coffee. I looked at it, looked at him. Yep, looks like me, my color, black. Got it, no sugar, no cream. Tasted it, lot of sugar. He said, "That's right, black and sweet." Okay, got it, noted. He said, "Now, you make your coffee." And so I did. I took the milk. We had old school jugs of milk. We didn't have like almond milk and oat milk and all. We just had regular old whole milk. I took the milk, I took the sugar, just regular old white sugar. You remember all that stuff that's not in style anymore, all the regular stuff. So I just took my coffee, I held my hand up like this, and I poured milk, and I stirred, and I poured a little bit more until I got it just this color. By the way, which is not very difficult to do. This is actually a very easy assignment. As soon as he said it, I was like, oh, I got this. And then I poured some sugar, more than my mom, but not as much as my dad. Got it. And to this day, I'm in my mid-50s, I still drink my coffee the same way. I tell this story because I think that was the beginning of my cultural curiosity. It was a beginning of me kind of saying, what do I like and what do other people like? And how are we communicating about what we like and dislike together? And how are we still part of the same culture, as in that situation, family? And also we have individual needs and interests and preferences that show up. And that became kind of the first step in what has been a really fun kind of journey that I've been on the rest of my life, just exploring culture. And so what I'd like for us to talk about today is kind of a little bit of that exploratory journey. And also, what does it mean for us, for you as leaders, as people who are participants in your culture and our culture in many ways, people who are shaping culture here at CMAA, locally, at your clubs, in your communities, as you bring on new members, right? What are all of the ways in which you are personifying, helping to shape, helping to nurture the kind of beautiful culture that you want to participate in and that you also want for the future? This interesting path that I started on early in my life kind of led me to exploring in ways that have been really enriching. So as early on as my teenage years, I remember starting to do work where I'd sit with other students, not exactly peer counseling, but really in a space of trying to facilitate and help shape conversations about where do we want to go. One of my earliest experiences was, unfortunately, one of the earliest school shootings, very memorable school shootings in the United States. It was at Columbine High School. I was called in and sat with students in the wake of absolute horrific tragedy that was absolutely new to all of us, and try to figure out, where are we? How do we regroup and start thinking about and laying a path for reentry? How is it that we can come back from this horrific experience that we've just had and move into the next phase of our lives? And what are the things that we're going to need to support each other? Later on, I was able to do some additional work like that, working with indigenous communities. There was mention of some of the work working with various kind of policy and communities and activism and education, heavy on education. Because more than anything, I think the opportunity to understand culture is really about connecting with each other. How is it that we create space to talk to each other in ways that allow us to learn, to listen, to actually hear each other, to find paths forward that will allow for the path that we must forge together. I thankfully had opportunities to spend time in Saudi Arabia, many times over, actually helping to do leadership development at one of their newer universities that the king had recently commissioned, and spending time with women in Saudi Arabia where I could sit, coming from the United States, with all of my opinions about what it means and experience about what it means to be a woman, and then go into Saudi Arabia and sit with Saudi women and say, tell me your experience, and suspend judgment and not bring my US lenses or perceptions or values or expectations to that conversation, and have them say things to me that startled me, that were absolutely different than what it is that I was expecting them to say, and to learn about what it is to live and navigate a 5,000-year-old culture versus some of the experiences that I've had in a couple of 100-years-old culture. And also, even more recently, to start thinking about some of the lessons that we can learn from some of the experiences like in Rwanda, where just 20 years ago, there was a horrific genocide, where neighbor against neighbor, people were killing each other and being killed and maimed in atrocities. And today, literally today, in 2024 and 2025, people who were the actors and the people who were the victims sitting side by side and talking about the process of reconciliation and having deep relationships and actually having adopted families being forged in these experiences together. And what does it mean culturally, but also what does it mean structurally to come together and heal, as far as some of the new ways that policies have been shaped, more women are in leadership roles, there's opportunities for people to think about a future in a way that's hope-filled and exciting. So the reason I share some of these stories is because when I talk about culture and when we think about culture, there's culture that exists at many levels. Of course, we have our clubs, of course, we have our families, of course, we have our communities, but all of us have many layers of culture that we will have the opportunity over the course of our lives to either experience and or have impact us in some way. It depends on at what level the ripple will hit us. And it's important for us to always be thinking about, what does it matter to us, what's happening in the world, and what my role is as far as the cultural transformation that is always going to be part of our human experience. right? What is it that I can play? What is my agency? What is my opportunity, particularly as leaders? So I'm going to ask you, especially those of you who are in leadership roles, has there ever been a time when you have been surprised, when you've put your heart and soul into nurturing your club culture and something surprised you? Something happened, was said or done that didn't align with what you had been pouring your heart or soul into, or what that you expected. A couple of weeks ago, maybe it's kind of early December, I got a call from a client that I had been working with for several years. This woman who is an amazing CEO, culture rich, just always really clearly understands that having a healthy and vibrant organizational culture, bringing people together, is also going to mean that they always deliver the very best products to their clients, that they want people to be happy and fulfilled. And so she was always very intentionally creating space for it. She called me in early December and said, Dieta, I have a problem, and I need you to fly to New York. This is a New York headquartered agency, huge clients and ads and brands all over the world, and also they have members of their organization all over the world. She said, something happened. Somebody posted something in our anonymous feedback channel, and it has started taking on a life of its own. What they posted, I didn't put the direct quote here, but it had a little bit more of a salacious slant to it, right? And it said something like, this organization doesn't care about its employees. And there was another sentence after that, even though it was an anonymous channel, that allowed for the leaders of the organization to have a glimmer of where it was coming from. And then there were at least several other comments that followed that doubled down on, kind of seconded that sentiment. So she had cause for concern because this was in an open, real-time, unmoderated space. She was aghast, and also she was very surprised. So she called me and said, can you get to New York and sit and talk with some of our leaders, but more importantly, sit and talk with the employees and figure out what's going on and let them know, like you just walking through the door will symbolize to them, we're doing something. And I was like, first of all, I'm on my way to Morocco, and second, me coming through the door is not going to symbolize the same thing that they're asking for. What they're looking for is engagement. They put something into a public space that they know you're in. They are trying to say something. And your opportunity right here, right now, is to say, I hear you. I will step forward. We are going to figure this out together. I said, go back to that space and say, I hear it. I don't quite understand, but let's figure this out together. Let's put forward a plan of action ASAP to figure out what it is that's going on here and what it is that I can do. She didn't have to have all the information. And by the way, this is one of the tricky, slippery slopes with anonymous feedback channels, right? That it's really hard to actually follow up and figure out what's going on and get additional information about context, about what the potential solutions are. We can talk about that after, which I definitely will get to. But it definitely underscored for her how important her role is. And it also beautifully echoes what Dee Dee said earlier this morning. I'm so happy for that keynote that she had this morning where she talked about sometimes as leaders, we have to step forward and say the thing that has yet to be spoken, right? And she was uncomfortable because she felt like, no, this was walking into their space. No. This is our space together, and this is an opportunity for me to real time let you know, I hear you, here we are. They're looking for engagement. Engagement is incredibly important to think about. So we know how important organizational culture is, right? We hear it all the time. We think about it all the time. There's plenty of articles about it. There's sessions everywhere in this conference. It's amazing on leadership. A lot of it has to also do with things that are directly related to organizational culture and health. But actually, there are a lot of disengaged employees in the world. Right? So the data would show that real-time we have about 9 trillion people who are disengaged. The productivity level of disengaged employees doesn't just impact the people who are disengaged, it of course impacts us as leaders, and it absolutely impacts our organizational culture. So the increase in engagement is the question. How is it that we create space where we can understand more of what it is that is real-time needed in order to allow for people to feel like they are fully present, able to be fully productive, have the tools that they need and the support that they need in ways that continue to change? Everything keeps changing. And so with that, what does it mean for us as we're also navigating the realities of changing expectations, right, of our members, changing expectations of the communities that we live in, changing expectations at policy level, changing expectations in the economy, changing expectations as far as new and younger people who are coming into our professional communities, and changing expectations for our leadership style? What does that look like for us, and how do we navigate that? So to talk a little bit more about this important topic, what I'll start by doing is just describing what organizational culture is a little bit. So organizational culture is, to be incredibly simple about it, it is our values enacted together. That's it. What we value translates into how we behave together. If it's just me, it ain't cultural, right? But if it's us, and we have the ability to have kind of shorthand ways of understanding, this is how we drink coffee. And when my daddy says, this is how we drink coffee, I don't need to, what's a giggle? It's like a little giggle, right? That's culture. It's a tiny little subtle thing. But all of us have little things like that we just say inside, and we know what that means, and that allows us to have that sense of familiarity, that sense of belonging that is culture. But what it also allows us to do is bring on new members of the culture and also double down on our culture. So I study culture, so I'm going to take a moment and just describe this just a little bit more because it's really, really interesting to think about. Culture, at its essence, always has 4 elements. 4. Culture is created, culture is learned, culture is internalized, and culture is taught. So I learn culture through my parents telling me, this is how we drink coffee. You go try it for yourself. Little tiny things that I hear and see and experience. This is how I drink coffee is the simplest of examples, and there are a lot of other little tiny inputs that we always get all the time, right? This is who we are, this is what we do. It's learned. We learn culture. I say, okay, this is how coffee is prepared. My father may have said to me, this is how we drink coffee. But I say, this is how coffee is prepared. Those are 2 different things. Because what I just did in that translation is called internalization. Internalization means that I took what was taught to me and I believed it to be truth with what I describe as truth with a capital T. This is how coffee is prepared. This is how everyone in the world prepares coffee. Even if that isn't the truth or I don't have that data, I just kind of give myself a shorthand. And so internalization of culture, and culture uniquely does this, and culture does this for everyone. That we believe the way that things work around here to be the way things work. And that's kind of the shorthand. And over time, we stop questioning why we do things because it's just the way things are done. And we also don't add qualifiers like this is the way we do it. We just add this is the way things are done. And so then when we bump into another culture, we're like, well, that's strange, right? Because that's not how you make coffee. The other thing that we do with culture is we teach it. So we teach culture like this. To my son, whose name is Shiloh, Shiloh, would you like coffee? Yes. He's 16 now, so we've already had this conversation. This is a long time ago. Would you like coffee? Yes. Okay, and I do the exact same thing to him that my father did to me. And the whole conversation. And so now, if Shiloh were here, and I would say, Shiloh, how do we make coffee? We make coffee by he would do it exactly the same. And his coffee would look different than mine because it's a little bit different, right? And so the other thing that we do is we teach culture in a way that allows us to hold on to it, because culture makes us feel good, and it makes us feel like we have a space, and it also is a shortcut to get through life. These are my folks. This is what we do. That's way easier than every single time I'm in a new space, I have to start over and explain, no, that is not how we make coffee. And so the other thing that culture does is it allows us to navigate in and out of relationships, but it also allows us to have a really strong and beautiful core. Long time ago, interculturalists, people who were kind of akin to anthropologists / sociologists, studied culture. There were kind of the granddaddies of culture, people who would run around the world. At that point, this was way before social media. So cultures were much more delineated than they are now. And study what makes one culture this way and another culture that way, and what are some of the tendencies, et cetera, kind of the things that are always present in a culture. And they found some of the things like created, learned, internalized, taught, those sorts of things. They also found that culture seeks stasis, right? So culture is created in order to help us identify us, literally. Like the purpose of culture is usness. Tricky when we're trying to bring in new folks, right? Because the whole goal is to identify usness. Now, us, them is not always nefarious. Like Chiefs, Eagles, like it's not always like a bad, right? We do this all the time, right? I went to this school, you went to that school, got it, right? What t-shirt, that's just regular, all the time. Those are all cultural. All of that is culture. So usness is us to be able to say, this is how we do. At this club, this is what we do. These are the things that are unique to us. The other thing, though, about culture is that it holds on to itself. It wants to stay still. And it's hard to change it because, like this iceberg analogy of culture, only a small portion of culture is actually has access to the external environment. So this iceberg analogy of culture was created by one of these granddaddies of culture that I was mentioning. This is Clyde Kluckhohn. And he described this iceberg analogy of culture. By the way, this analogy is not going to be useful for too much longer because our ice caps are not very stable, unfortunately. But this model was originally created for interculturalism, but then it was applied to organizational culture by a person named Edgar Schein. And this model with these words on it come from that language that's related to organizations. So in any organization, there are certain attributes, but the iceberg analogy still works, that about 10% of a culture, organizationally speaking, is above the analogous waterline. It's how people dress, it's your physical setting, it's when people show up at your club, what are they greeted by, right? It's how you welcome new guests, it's the orientation that new members get, it's the kind of events that are on your calendar, it's the kind of, programming that you have. All of that are called artifacts. At the waterline are things that are called espoused values. Espoused values are what we say about ourselves, what we tell other people, right? It's what we put on our website or our t-shirt, the things that we talk to new employees about as they're in the candidacy process or as they're going through orientation and onboarding. It's the kind of things that we describe to our members. A little bit deeper into this, it's what's called values in action. And values in action is how we actually behave. And this is the interesting part. To the extent that our espoused values and our values in action have a very small gap between them, that who we say we are and how people actually experience us behaving, when that gap is small, we are on fire. That is us just kicking tail. We are in there. We are making sure that we are living out every single day through our behaviors, our choices, our communication, our decision making, our recruitment processes, how it is that we're coaching and nurturing and giving feedback to our employees. All of those things, fantastic. But when they're not, there's a big gap that potentially can happen between who we say we are and how people experience us. And when that gap gets big, we experience what I like to call the rumble, right? This rumble, like, whoa, wait, this isn't what I signed up for. You told me that you valued X, or you told me that I would be able to Y, or I thought we said we were going to Z. That gap causes a rumble. At any level of culture, that gap causes a rumble, right? The other thing that potentially happens is that over time, this always happens in culture, right? Because I study culture, I'm always zooming out and looking at culture. Any of us can think about culture real time, but to zoom out and think about over time culture is pretty interesting. Over time, our espoused values change and kind of stay the same. Let me give you an example. I know this is a global audience, but I'm going to use an example from the United States macro culture for just a moment. Espoused values. Think about the United States values. One of the values that's kind of inarguable, like nobody would argue this, is family. Like we care about family. And by the way, I can't think of too many cultures that don't have that as a value, right? Family, respect, like there are certain values that people just, yep, that's easy. So think about United States and that one value. It hasn't gone anywhere, it's probably not going anywhere. But if you were gonna pick a point in time and think about how it is that we understand our culture or experience of our culture just through the lens of that one value, what might it look like? What might it look like if you were looking at the value of family in 1950s United States? What would it look like? What would be some visual representation of the word family? Wife at home, cooking dinner. Is there like, think about television. Is there visuals here? Is anybody old enough to remember this? Huh? Leave It to Beaver, right? Even if you're not old enough, you may have seen reruns. There were like visual representation cues. Now, by the way, every family in the United States in the 1950s did not look like Beaver to Cleaver, but we had ways of conveying what our value was in ways that allowed people to kind of have a sense of this is how it's represented here. We had a definition and an understanding of this is it. Now, same value, tricky. Changed a lot. You know why it's changed a lot? Because there are all sorts of things that are coming from the external environment that have shifted not the value, but the definition and the expression of that value, right? Things like big shifts in the economy or women pushing really hard to get into the workforce that have shifted. And what has happened is that same expression of family has taken on very different interpretations, right? And also it's changed the infrastructure of the United States, some of the values and also some of the infrastructure. So for example, post-50s into the 70s, we had the invention of a multi-billion-dollar industry that didn't even exist before called daycare, right? There are all sorts of things that must come to exist because we shift a little thing about one value, but we don't let go of the value. And that's how culture changes always. We're constantly wrestling with what does this value mean to us, those of us who are here and now? Remember I said there are four things that are associated with culture. Created is the first. So as we kind of create culture, create our club culture, create our family culture, create culture in our community, we're constantly saying, well, wait a minute, we created this, but is it still the same? Are we still interpreting it the same? What does it mean for us now? How do we define it? What does it look like when we actually do it behaviorally? Do we like it? Does it feel good? That's constantly a question with culture, and culture is constantly going through that iteration. And so the opportunity for us is to always be thinking about not just what our values are and putting it on a t-shirt or putting it up in the break room or putting it in our new member orientation, but having conversations with ourselves and with our colleagues, with our teams, with our new employees especially, and saying, what do these values mean to us now? What do they mean to you? When you define respect, what does that mean to you? What does it look like? What does respect look like in action? If I asked every single person in here to write down a definition of respect, I guarantee I'd get as many people as they are different definitions. Everybody loves these words, but nobody shares the same definition of them. And so it's incredibly difficult to actually say, how are we going to get synced up about how we want to behave together and how it is that we want to make sure that we are respecting each other if you and I don't have the same definition of respect, right? And that's going to be so important for us to continue to do, especially as, I think I heard it this morning, what is the percentage? A pretty huge percent. 56% is over 50 or something like that, and there's opportunity for new leadership to continue coming into play. How do we normalize conversations about what do our values look like and mean like? How do we carry it forward? I also hearken back on this same topic to the sharing that Dee Dee did this morning, where she talked about, right, the three kind of values that had come from maybe a list of 7, and how the interpretation between those changes so significantly, and how aligning with, but also having ourselves feel accountable for, and having the benefits of all of that work is lost if we're not having those conversations. What does this look like to us, those of us here and now, and what does it look like in action? How do we behave this in ways that allow us to feel like we're part of the same cultural community, and it's a satisfying one that we all want to be in together? Culture changes in our organizations, but it changes in a couple of ways. But us just kind of saying, it's not going to change, or I'm not going to deal with it, is a little tricky, because change is going to happen no matter what. It always has. Culture has always changed, right? So this isn't good or bad. It's not an opinion. It's just culture is going to change. So how do we want to deal with that? There's 2 options, right? There's managed and unmanaged. So unmanaged cultural change is cultural change that is catalyzed by external events. Something happens in the world. It can be an economic shift. It can be that there are very different kinds of folks who want to join our club, who may have different experiences. Maybe they're coming from a different part of the world or a region where club membership and experience is very different here. Maybe it's some of the things that people are asking for are different, but there may be some external events that are catalyzing some of the changes. Or some grassroots organizing, as in we get some new folks who are in and they just say, hey, we have some ideas, we really want to come together and we want to share those with you. And they feel very strongly about that. Oftentimes, when there is change that's happening, a lot of times what we try to do is just fix it. We run around like whack-a-mole, right? When somebody say, this isn't working, or that's not working, or I want more of this, or I need more of that, we kind of just try to fix the one thing that people said isn't working for them, right? Or we're doing things that feel a little bit more kind of check the box. Okay, well, we got that engagement stored to a better place, or we satisfied that one thing, or we got that particular employee situated. And what we are missing sometimes is a larger scale opportunity to think about what is it that we want to do to position ourselves for where it is that we want to be. So a managed organizational change is one that is led by senior leaders, but it also is facilitated so that it allows for every single member of our culture to have voice. All of us are part of culture, right? My parents, in my simple story that I started with, absolutely had the ability to make the final decision, but they engaged me in a way that allowed me to feel some ownership, and they let me know that I'm part of this culture too. And that was incredibly satisfying. And it also taught me a really brilliant lesson about how it is that I want to parent, right? For us as leaders and as managers, how is it that we engage people and say, where are we? Where do we want to be? How do we want to shape our next steps together? right? In a way that allows for kind of a co-ownership and also doesn't put all of the burden on your shoulders as leaders, potentially, to have to figure out everything on your own. This is all about amplifying our core values. And values are always, always, always the thing that keeps culture strong and also attracts and keeps people connected to culture. And so anchoring to our core values, what is it that brought us here together? What is it that we care about? What are our shared commitments? And then how do we define and interpret those in ways that are unique and meaningful to us? That's the opportunity, always. But to anchor to something that allows for us to make sure that we're always accentuating the positive. Culture can and should be always about accentuating the positive opportunities for people to come together and to shine because we're coming together in ways that work well for all of us. Sometimes we don't quite figure that out and we use techniques that aren't serving us well, but there's huge opportunity for actually right-siding that. Cultural transformation, it's always happening. But I use this beautiful analogy because of the butterfly, because sometimes there's like these messy bits in between. But the opportunity for all of us is to always remember what it is that we're trying to become. What we're trying to become. Let me tell you the vision that comes to my mind when I say that. That family that was standing here on stage this morning, multi-generational family, amazing. It told me so much about CMAA, and then also welcoming in new people and greeting. That's the aspiration. That's that butterfly at the end. This is who we are. This is who we are always becoming. But being able to hold on to and continue to paint that picture and make sure that that picture continues to translate into the minds and hearts and work of all of our club employees and members is always the opportunity. Why is that important? Why is that butterfly important to have in our mind? Because in the absence of vision, humans fall to fear. In the absence of vision, there's a beautiful, profound quote that comes from a leadership guru, and he says, in the absence of vision, pettiness prevails. People become petty if we don't know where we're going. If we don't understand, why are we going through all of this? What's going to come next? My daddy's from the South. Grown folks like to know what's going to happen next. All grown folks like to know what's going to happen next. And in the absence of that, people hunker down, not just individually, but also collectively. They hunker down to fear. And fear causes what's called emotional tension. Emotional tension is where we get into that kind of fight or flight mode, where the resources that could be available to like the problem-solving, creative, risk-taking, engaged, innovative part of us are not really available to us physiologically, neurologically, literally not available to us because all of our energy is kind of in our extremities. Where as I used to talk to my son when he was younger, we're kind of all cortisoled up, right? Just waiting for the next news, waiting for the next shoe to drop. That's what happens in the absence of vision. Where are we going? And what is all this effort for? In the absence of that, humans are like, oof, we're kind of bracing. And you've seen this. You've had moments like this in your life or career where somebody else had information that they didn't share with you, or you thought they did, or there was some decision that you were waiting for that had you nervous and kind of frozen, like, what do I do next, right? And so for you as leaders, as colleagues, always being to think about, how do we paint the picture of that butterfly? How do we describe the story? Here we are, here's current reality, here's where we're going. Here are the steps, but also the things that we need in order to progress in that direction. The things that we need along the way as people, as leaders, as managers, as colleagues, as employees, we need the motivation to do it. Like I need to want to do it. So you're going to have to, if you are my leader, my manager, you're going to have to help me understand, why is this important? How does this align with our values? I signed up here for a reason. Help me make the connection. I also need the skills. Is it something I can do? It's hard for me to be motivated if I actually don't think I'm capable of doing the thing that you're asking of me. I need to have psychological safety Psychological safety is the belief that if I try something and I don't get it perfect by your standards the first time, that you're not going to shame me and that you're going to support me through the learning process. That's psychological safety. That I have the ability to learn out loud, and it's okay. As long as I'm trying and as long as I'm willing and able to make the course corrections, that I am going to still be part of this community, of this culture. I need challenges, and I also need what's called virtuous feedback. And when I say virtuous feedback, what I mean is feedback that doesn't disconnect our relationship, where I don't believe that our relationship is lost because I did something or because we're having this conversation, right? Vicious feedback is, you tell me, something happens, we talk about it, I feel diminished or embarrassed, and therefore I pull myself back. And you then observe me pulling back, and you make a judgment about that, and then I pull back more. And the judgment becomes harsher, and then we actually have kind of this vicious cycle that starts spiraling down like this. The opposite is we have an experience, we talk about it, we have a feedback conversation, we make some agreements about next steps, and then because of that, we actually increase our trust for each other because we're working together toward a shared goal, and because we have strengthened our ability to understand that we're both on the same team and working on behalf of each other. I know that your feedback coming to me is in my own best interest. It's not coming to harm me or shame me. We need clarity and support. We need to know where we're going next and what does it look like when we're doing it well. This is one of the biggest challenges, especially as leaders, especially as we think about organizational culture, is painting the small pictures. Sometimes we get so kind of grand about pictures, and everybody learns differently, everybody understands things differently, but at the end of the day, our brains are wired to require kind of data points, right? To be able to say, this is what I did last time, and this is what it felt like, or this is what the outcome was, and we kind of hearken back to the last time and the last time and the last time. So we need to have small increments where we can be clear about, here's what the goal is, and here's what the feedback is related to how it is that I did towards that. And I need to be clear about what it is that's expected of me, which is very difficult to do, especially when we're going through change at any level. And we need affirmation. We need to believe that we're going forward in a genuine, authentic, caring relationship, and we need to know that we'll be recognized for our efforts and for our contributions. So one of the things that I know about culture is that, as interesting as I find it, it's also a bit kind of high level sometimes, and that it's helpful sometimes to just talk about real practical tools for negotiating and navigating conversations that would allow for us to real time be able to use them. This is my favorite. This is one of the most practical tools. Many years ago, in my bio it was shared, I was the director of the Human Rights Office, which meant people came to me with complaints of discrimination, and I listened to and investigated. Mostly I just mediated. I was like a facilitator. Tell me what you thought, how do we figure this out? A lot of times I was using this tool. It's called conflict mediation. So its tool is incredibly practical. Here's how it works. It's called the ladder of inference because it actually works like a ladder, as in you start at the bottom rung and you walk up it. It comes from researchers Peter Singhi and Chris Argyris. It's fantastic. This is how it goes. I'm going to give an example. I'll use myself. I'm driving down the street. I have a truck. I'm listening to a book on tape. My son is in the passenger seat. He's asking me a question about a date for this. Do you have this on your schedule? Do you have that? I'm listening to him, trying to have a conversation. I'm trying to catch a couple of words of my book on tape. We're also approaching an intersection. There's a four-way traffic signal to my right. There's a school. There's a ball like bouncing around, kids playing soccer, right? Data everywhere. There's other cars on the road. Data everywhere. That's the bottom of this ladder. The bottom of this ladder is that oftentimes, millions of times a day, we are surrounded by data. all kinds of data. I mean lowercase data, right? Just stuff, I'm coming from everywhere. We have to, a million times a day, decide on autopilot, without even thinking about it, which piece of data we prioritize. In that moment, what is the most important piece of data I should be focusing on? I am approaching a traffic signal, right? I have a four-way intersection. There's a traffic signal. My son's asking me a question. I have a book. All of these things. What do I focus on? Does anybody know the right answer, by the way? What color is the signal, right? Yeah, of course, right? But of course, we learn that over time. I'm also paying attention to the kids on the schoolyard just to make sure. But of course, making sure there's no one in the crosswalk. But I have to, of all those bits of data, I have to real time make a decision and step up to the first rung of the ladder of inference and say, I'm going to filter out all of that other data and prioritize this particular data. It is the most important, so that I know whether I keep going or whether I stop. The next rungs of the ladder are that I add meanings, right? So I see, okay, the light is red, and so what I am going to do is assume, I am going to add meaning and interpret that the light means red, I must stop. That also means, as I continue up, that the other cars going the other direction have a green light, that they're going to sail through, that the kids are going to stay on the other side of the fence. All of those things are meanings and assumptions that I add inside of that ladder. And then at the very top of the ladder is the decision to act. I say or do something. Everything else on the ladder of inference is just happening in my brain. And it's all happening like that. You all have driven before, where you've gotten from point A to point B and you don't even remember the drive in between. That's because we all have ladders, right, that allow us to do this real-time autopilot. So I take all this data and I put all of it into focus, and I say, I am going to stop at this light. And all of us do this millions and millions and million times a day, so many that we don't even remember most of them. The tricky part is that our brains were not wired for the amount of data that we input, especially now in the age of social media. We are inputting far more data than any of us can possibly ingest and actually deal with in a responsible way. It's too much. Literally, we're not wired for it. The good thing is that our brains help us. It's also a tricky thing. So the way that our brains are wired is to allow us to be able to make mental shortcuts so that we can then decide how to very quickly, without having to think about it, what data we're going to pay attention to. And so it does something that is called a reflexive loop. So this big orange loop is called a reflexive loop. And that means that my brain, once I have a belief about something, it autopilot, without me thinking about it, directs my energy and my attention to the thing that I already believe to be true, over and over and over again. So this is how this plays out in your club. I have this employee, really bright, has a lot of potential, but seems to have this thing with coming in late. I'm starting to get concerned. And then I catch him coming in late. But I stop catching him doing all the other good stuff that he does. I literally kind of discriminate against the thing that I already have a belief around. This plays out as far as our kids in school. Did you have that kid? I had that kid, that little naughty kid. And I'm like, do you ever catch him doing anything good? Ever? It's always something naughty he's doing, right? We have this all the time where we kind of get a mental model in our head about a kid or a person or an employee or an opportunity or a relationship or an idea. This little shortcut is super important for us to know exists in our own brain, and by the way, in everybody's brain. So this is what this looks like in real life. You and I, all the time, times all of us in this room, are on different ladders all the time, interacting. And the way that it works is that I have my own data that I have selected based on my own previously held beliefs, and I am talking to you from what is called the top of my ladder based on my beliefs. I'm just saying, this is what I believe, louder and louder, as if I say it louder and more often, it will change your mind. And that, by the way, it doesn't work. It's the opposite. It actually works less. It actually doubles down people's opinion when we just yell at them our beliefs if we have contrary beliefs. Another opportunity in our organizations, as we think about culture, as we think about starting to engage more deeply, as we think about how it is that we can come to understand, tell me a little bit more about our values. Where are you coming from? Rather than standing at the top of our ladders and espousing beliefs and expecting that we are going to come to a resolution that is going to be satisfying to either of us, instead what we can do is say, tell me where you're coming from. That's a super interesting way of interpreting that, but that's different than how I would interpret it. Tell me a little bit more. When I think of respect, this is what it looks like for me. But share with me a little bit about your experience. Like, give me an example. What I'm asking for is help me walk down your ladder. Help me have access to the data that you're selecting. And it may be, well, let me tell you, back when I was in 5th grade, this thing happened, and it's stuck with me since. Oh. Got it. Okay, let's talk that through. Now, because we're deeper down at a place where we're closer to objectivity, humans are always subjective. But this is purely subjective. At the top of our ladders, purely subjective, really difficult to move at all. Down here, tell me where you're coming from. Got it. I have a little bit more understanding about the context. And now from there, we could potentially start to build a shared lexicon, shared language that allows us to be able to think about how we move forward as we start shaping our club values in action, as we start shaping how it is that we might think about our programming for next year, as we start thinking about some of the opportunities that we have for working with our new student interns, right? Getting down a little bit deeper allows us to be able to have a place that's not as heated, not just beliefs-based, but also allows us to create that path together. It's a co-created path. As we think about the practices of nurturing the culture that we want, there are going to be opportunities that all of us have for thinking about the small things that we do. And culture is often a huge combination of very small things. Huge combination of very small things filled with intentionality. By the way, we can go on autopilot, but the outcome may not be exactly ideal for any of us if we do that. But if we say, let's lean into this and let's talk together about what it is that we want to create, co-create together, where you can have your coffee your way and I can have my coffee my way, and we still have a really solid club where we get it and our coffee is kind of our own inside thing that creates an usness, that's cool. So this is back to the executive that I started with. And these are a couple of small things that she did that I think worked beautifully and translate well. Nurture what you want, not what you don't want. Fear has taken over in so many of our spaces. Aspiration and vision are more powerful. What is it that we want? What will it look like? What will it look like when people are excelling and thriving and fully optimized and on a track that feels incredibly satisfying to them? What does that look like? What does it feel like? Have aspiration-based conversations. And also think about systems and practices that reflect what you want. So I'm going to go back and double back to that anonymous feedback form. Everybody has very strong opinions about anonymous feedback forms. I also have one. I know that this is a place that people have different opinions. I think anonymous feedback forms are tricky. They're like social media, right? People just, but then you don't know what to do with it. You're like, what do I do with this? And there's no way to actually problem solve because I have no idea what the context is. And so another opportunity is to say, how is it that we actually will create a culture of feedback that allows us to act, that allows me to be able to hear you in a space that is safe, listen to what you're sharing with me, understand why it's important, and also problem solved, because that's the whole point. I want to do something about it. And so think about what are the systems and processes that you have in place that are nurturing what you want, and potentially those that are not aligned with what you want, or maybe even facilitating what you don't want. Enlist and engage your community. I don't think I have to tell this group there. If I would have attended this conference and then created this slide, I wouldn't have even had this there because you all know this. That idea session, amazing. The students up here, enlist your community, right? Make sure that everyone sees themselves as co-creating and sees themselves as an integral part and breathing life into the community, into the culture, right? And also allow people to spotlight their talents. It's not just about FaceTime. People also want their talents to be able to be shown and understood. That builds confidence and competence, right? When I'm able to show and spotlight my talents, and those are actually be able to be seen and recognized, it builds my confidence, but that confidence then allows me to take the next steps, which builds my competence. And so allow for that beautiful process to be one that you're intentionally laying the path for. Use structure and create clarity. A lot of times we kind of say, no, it'll figure itself out, it'll work itself out. Not really. A lot of times just giving people a space to kind of figure out, okay, what are the roles? What is it that we're looking for? How is it that we want to get there? Allows for just enough clarity for people to figure this out, right? It's like the story of the kid who was told, go outside and play. And a couple minutes later, he came back in and he's like, I don't know what to do, I'm bored. And then his mom said, okay, go outside and build me a sandcastle. Any kind of sandcastle you want, but I want it to be the very best sandcastle. Woo, well, that took hours and hours, right? Moats and dragons and all turrets, right? Enough structure so that people are clear about what it is that the expected outcome is. And timing. Timing matters, but more importantly, timing is experienced differently by different people. And so if I'm a leader and I'm trying to figure out what do I do, and I'm taking a long time and I'm sitting and waiting, the people who are around me, who are looking to me for guidance or direction, are probably feeling time differently than I am. Time feels slower to people who are waiting for somebody else who has the ability to communicate. So think about how important it is to step forward and pay attention to how time is experienced differently by different people. Step into the arena, right, even if we don't have all the answers, and let people know we're here real time and we'll work through it even as we're going through cultural transformation. So my last couple of things that I'll leave you with are prioritize culture, talk about it. It's beautiful, it's healthy. What is our culture? What does it look like? How do we know? What are the things we love the most about it? What are the things that make us feel proud? Talk about that. Ask those questions. Always ask them in the affirmative because people will tell you. Focus on your aspirations. People want to know what it's going to look like when we're doing it well. Describe those and affirm those and recognize those. Describe us. Who are we? What do us look like in a way that allows people to feel a sense of belonging and connection? Embed those small feedback loops in ways that let people know that we're going in the right direction. Look for and reward behaviors that are aligned with us and our culture that is important to us. Recognize people who are trying to contribute and also really reward that because we want to see our healthy cultures being kind of held up as models for other people. And then encourage the sharing of cultural stories because culture is taught and felt by the stories we tell about ourselves. And so tell stories. This is our culture. This is what we did. This is why it was important. This is how it was impactful. This is why it benefited a member. This is what it could potentially mean for us in the future. Keep telling those stories. Thank you. Thank you so much.